Peruvian authorities block a Bolivarian return to the homeland flight from picking up over 100 Venezuelan migrants. Cuba's foreign minister condemns criminal U.S. tactics during his speech at the United Nations General Assembly. And supporters of Julian Assange gather outside of Belmarsh prison in London. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. The ever-intensifying U.S. blockade on Venezuela is now affecting Conviasa flights under the Venezuelan government's return to the homeland repatriation plan. Over 100 migrants in Lima had planned to return home on Saturday, but airport authorities reportedly prevented the aircraft from landing. Venezuela's foreign minister Jorge Ariaza said that due to repeated and intentional obstacles put in place by the Peruvian government and companies to obstruct the supply of fuel to the humanitarian flight, they were forced to suspend it. He went on to demand respect for the human rights of Venezuelans who wish to return home.
I'm here, desperate. I don't know where I'm going to sleep, where I'm going to eat. I am here with my 2 children. One of my children is a year and 8 months old and needs medical attention. I want to go. I want to go, and they don't allow us to leave. We are tired of the xenophobia. They call us criminals, dogs. I want to leave. Nothing else to say. We want to live for the health of my son.
Our correspondent in Lima, Jaime Herrera, has more.
We're at the Jorge Chávez International Airport with over 100 Venezuelan citizens who, as you can see, have all their luggage with them. There's also small children here, many with health issues that could not be treated in Peru, as well as a number of senior citizens who need to fly out of the country today. But the Bolivarian return to the homeland flight that was supposed to arrive today has been cancelled for reasons linked to the economic war being waged against Venezuela. First, the plane from state-owned airline Conviasa was told it would not be allowed to refuel in Lima before heading back to Caracas. Eventually, this issue was resolved, but then Peruvian authorities simply decided to withdraw the flight's permission to fly into the country. This is why all these people are stranded outside the airport, with many saying they will have to spend the night on the street until the issue is hopefully resolved.
Protests intensified in Haiti on Friday, with police using live ammunition against protesters. In the capital, at least 4 protesters have been killed in recent days, as many roads were blocked with burning barricades and protesters looted stores and banks in wealthier areas. For months, Haitians have been grappling with widespread fuel and food shortages and double-digit inflation. They accuse public officials of corruption and are calling for President Jovenel Moise to stand down. Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez addressed the 74th meeting of the UN General Assembly on Saturday. During his speech, he condemned the U.S. administration's tightening of the decades-long blockade, which has recently led to fuel shortages across the island.
I denounce before the General Assembly of the United Nations that the government of the United States has begun in recent months to apply criminal, non-conventional measures to prevent the provision of fuel to our country from various markets, by using threats and persecution of companies that export to states registered with shipping and insurance companies. As a result, we have faced severe difficulties to ensure the supply of fuel required for the everyday life in the country, which has forced us to adopt temporary emergency measures.
Minister Bruno Rodriguez also had very strong words against a recent decision by the U.S. to impose travel sanctions on the first Secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba, Raul Castro, and his family.
The State Department announced that the first Secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba, Army General Raul Castro Ruz, would not be granted a visa to enter this country. This is an action that is devoid of any practical effect. It is aimed at offending Cuba's dignity and the sentiments of our people. It is done only to please the Cuban-American extreme right. However, the obvious and offensive lies that are being used as a justification, and which I strongly reject in the most energetic terms, reflect the baseness and rot which this U.S. administration resorts to as it drowns in a sea of corruption, lies, and immorality.
Vice President Delcy Rodriguez addressed the General Assembly on behalf of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on Friday. Her discourse included sharp remarks on the economic terrorism waged against Venezuela by the United States.
The United States uses the dominance of the dollar as the international reserve currency. The Treasury Department is the economic Pentagon, militarizing international relations and punishing millions of innocent people to enforce doctrines of regime change and to steal the resources of nations. The existence of these measures show that the international legal order has disappeared. Venezuela has become the best evil experiment against multilateralism. Economic terrorism against Venezuela has caused a 9-fold drop in its income. Between 2015 and 2018, the total losses for the Venezuelan economy reached $130 billion because of the brutal financial blockade imposed by the United States, which is a shameless robbery of all our resources.
Bilateral relations between Russia and Venezuela continue to deepen, especially following the recent talks held between Presidents Nicolas Maduro and Vladimir Putin. Let's take a closer look at this growing relationship.
Russia uses any opportunity to express its support for Venezuela and to condemn the U.S. economic blockade hitting the South American nation, as well as the various coup attempts orchestrated by Washington. They expressed their support even at the United Nations.
Such key elements of the UN charters as non-interference into internal affairs, as well as unacceptability of use of force, are being challenged. There have been attempts to add Venezuela to the list of countries whose statehood was destroyed by aggression and coups instigated from abroad. Russia, as well as the vast majority of UN members, reject attempts to bring back the rules dating back to the Monroe Doctrine to Latin America. External attempts to change regimes of sovereign nations through military intimidation, illegal forcing and blockades, as is happening in relation to Cuba, despite multiple UN resolutions.
The recent visit of President Nicolas Maduro to Russia reaffirmed the country's support for the Bolivarian Revolution.
Since Russia and China are both permanent members of the UN Security Council, it has been impossible for the U.S. to legally carry out any military attacks on Venezuela, like they last did in Libya.
One of the main topics discussed by the two presidents was economic cooperation.
As of today, our countries' relations have only deepened. They have been doing so since President Maduro first took power in 2013, but they became even closer after Maduro's latest victory at the polls. Despite threats and intervention attempts, Russia has not backed down.
Under the constant attacks from the U.S., Venezuela now looks to become an integral ally of the emerging powers, with Russia shared geopolitics and economic interests have led to a mutually beneficial relationship.
These growing superpowers are proof of Mao's words back in '74. When he spoke about the rise of the Third World, the world's economy is seeing a great change with the rise of China and their Belt and Road Initiative. These emerging nations are promoting new development strategies.
In the short term, the Russia-Venezuela working agenda includes increasing military, medical, and technological cooperation, as well as in matters of energy and food production.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute.
acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley spoke passionately about the need for dialogue and a peaceful solution in Venezuela. It was one of the main themes in her speech to the UN General Assembly.
But what we know is that you cannot propel war over dialogue. The people of Venezuela must be allowed to decide their own future in accordance with the principles of the United Nations Charter. Principles of non-intervention, non-interference, prohibition of the threat or use of force, respect for the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. It is regrettable that other multilateral organizations have not followed their own charters.
Prime Minister Mottley also blasted the United States for its long-standing blockade of Cuba and its latest tightening of restrictive measures against the island.
Our relationship is based with Cuba on a historical foundation rooted in solidarity, cooperation, and complementarity of a common Caribbean civilization. And we say that the long-standing economic embargo on Cuba continues to be a cause of serious concern. I reaffirm Barbados' strong opposition to this unilateral action, and more so, the recent activation of Article 3 of the Helms-Burton Law imposes new restrictions and further exacerbates the situation. And I ask you here, to what end? To what end? The continued attempt to stop the people of Cuba from living with basic human dignity is unacceptable.
Other Caribbean leaders also spoke on the aggression which Cuba and Venezuela continue to face and the need to maintain peace in the Caribbean region.
My government once again calls on the United States to lift the debilitating sanctions against Cuba and those against Venezuela. You're killing innocent people.
The sustained and coordinated attempts to engage in externally imposed regime change in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is but one egregious example of the current trend. We are witness to an illegal economic blockade, eerily similar to the one against Cuba, that we annually and overwhelmingly decry as immoral and anachronistic. We are in possession of indisputable evidence of extensive foreign interference in the sovereign affairs of the Venezuelan people and the frequent, unambiguous threats of military intervention.
Syria's Deputy Prime Minister also spoke before the UN General Assembly. He joined the calls for the immediate lifting of sanctions imposed on all independent people.
From this rostrum, we call once again for the lifting of such illegal measures imposed on Syrians and on all other independent people, in particular the people of Iran, Venezuela, the DPRK, Cuba, and Belarus. We stand with China and Russia in the face of the unjust American policies.
Hundreds of protesters gathered in Libya at Martyrs Square in Tripoli to call for a ceasefire between the government of national accord and forces loyal to General Khalifa Haftar. Citizens also protested against Haftar's forces, calling them a criminal enterprise. Clashes have been ongoing since April as the Libyan National Army seeks to overthrow the UN-recognized government. However, on Wednesday, Haftar announced that he was open to dialogue ahead of a special UN session on the situation in Libya. According to the World Health Organization, since April, more than 300 people have been killed and more than 1,000 have been wounded due to clashes.
Today, we are part of this blessed movement in our beloved capital. This movement that supports our heroes, our men who are repelling this brutal aggression, who are repelling this criminal enterprise that aims to restore a military state and dictatorship.
Authorities in Nigeria have been trying to find the families of hundreds of men and boys who were held captive in a school in Kaduna. Over 400 captives were freed on Thursday, their ages ranging from 6 to 50, after a raid on Thursday in the school where they had been chained, sexually abused, and tortured. More than a dozen, including 10 children, were hospitalized after the rescue. Police raided the school after a relative was denied access to the captives. 7 people who said that they were teachers at the school were arrested in the raid.
Yesterday when I came, one of them was vomiting blood. So it is really critical. One could not even stand. And then there are some few that we need to take also to the psychiatric hospital to ascertain the level of illness.
The body of Zimbabwe's former president, Robert Mugabe, has been buried in Katuma, his home village, after weeks of wrangling between his family and the government over his final resting place. Mugabe's family had earlier agreed to bury him at a shrine in Harare, as a hilltop mausoleum was to be built for him. But on Thursday, the government abruptly announced that the family had changed its mind. Hundreds of mourners assembled for the low-key event, which was initially intended to be a private family ceremony. Mugabe died in Singapore on September 6th at the age of 95, almost 2 years after a military coup ended his 37-year rule.
Mugabe was a hero. People are in pain because he is being buried in the village, and also because of the way in which he was removed from power. This is a man who was our relative and who was highly regarded.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transformed the world today. On Monday, only on Venezuela.
Welcome back. A rally in support of jailed WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was held outside of Belmarsh Prison in London. Activists also held an award ceremony to honor Assange with the Gavin McFadden Award for whistleblowers. More in this report from Pablo Navarrete in London.
Here outside the high-security prison Belmarsh in the south of London, there is an act of solidarity being taking place with the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange. Around 60 people have come to demand that Julian Assange is not extradited to the US, demand from the UK government, and to show their solidarity with the plight of the jailed WikiLeaks founder. We've had speeches from the British MP Chris Williamson, independent journalist, and a speech by Julian Assange's father, who's here to receive the journalism prize that has been given to Julian here today. This is part of a global day of solidarity with Julian Assange, with events in Australia, in the US and Canada. And this one outside Belmarsh Prison, high security prison, where Julian Assange has been since April, when he was expelled effectively from the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK. This act is here today demanding that the UK government does not extradite Julian Assange to the US, and showing solidarity with the jailed WikiLeaks founder.
And Pablo also spoke to Chris Williamson and Eileen Chubb during the Don't Extradite Assange Solidarity Rally, which was held outside the Belmarsh prison.
Well, I wanted to show my solidarity with Julian Assange because I believe his treatment is absolutely intolerable, and he's been someone who I think we should all be venerating as probably the most important journalist in the world. And I know many human rights organisations have stated that the way in which the British state has treated him is tantamount to torture. And I think it's really crucial that we stand together to try and prevent the government from extraditing Julian, because he is potentially facing a prison sentence of around 175 years for the heinous crime of exposing the abuse of state power. And the charges, however, are that it's computer misuse and unauthorised disclosure of defence information. That unauthorised disclosure actually is exposing appalling war crimes. So we owe Julian a huge debt of gratitude. I think it's the least I could do to be here today to show my support.
As whistleblowers, we feel it's really important that we have a free press, and we've seen that eroded and eroded and eroded, and we see it all the time. So we've helped over 7,000 whistleblowers and over 5,000 families who've lost a loved one because whistleblowers were ignored. So our evidence is massive. We've been doing this for 20 years. We have a lot of information on the website. But the Gavin McFadden Award is to highlight great journalism and also to shine a light on very poor journalism or lack of journalism. And we campaign for free speech and free press, and of course for Julian, because it naturally follows that you can't be for Julian Assange, and be for whistleblowers. You can't be against Julian Assange. As far as we are concerned, he is a hero.
Vote counting has begun in Afghanistan after citizens voted in presidential elections. But the elections were marred by violence, as close to 20 attacks on polling stations were carried out by the Taliban, with explosions reported in the cities of Kabul, Kandahar, and Jalalabad, leaving several wounded. President Ashraf Ghani is seen as the frontrunner, with Abdullah, the country's chief executive, trailing behind. Preliminary results are not expected before October 15th, while final results will come after November 7th. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has not officially responded to an offer by the United States to allegedly remove all sanctions on Iran in exchange of talks. Speaking following his return from the UN General Assembly, Rouhani said this is due to the current poisonous atmosphere.
And the European officials had said clearly that they will remove the sanctions totally. But well, the form of this action was not an acceptable one. It means that in the atmosphere of sanctions, and under the continuation of sanctions, and under the poisonous atmosphere of maximum pressure, even if we decide to negotiate with Americans within 5+1 framework, no one can predict what would be the end and conclusion of such negotiation.
We go to Ghana now, where solidarity with Venezuela was shown in Accra as movements and artists took a stand against the economic blockade on Venezuela. It all took place on Wednesday, with music and dance hosted by the Socialist Forum of Ghana. Comrades wore No More Trump shirts in solidarity, and the event was streamed on Pan-African TV.
The pro-imperialist anti-Venezuelan forces, both within and outside the country, cannot defeat the Bolivarian revolution started by Hugo Chavez because it is deeply rooted in the aspiration of the masses. The Socialist Forum of Ghana proclaims loud and clear that we will not allow the machination of imperialism to succeed in Venezuela, and we have joined the global movement of solidarity with the heroic people of Venezuela. Together we say the resources of Venezuela belongs to the Venezuelans and must be managed by the Venezuelan government.
And performing revolutionary music at the event was the Freedom Band. We leave you with a bit of that performance.
It's a war until there's no longer first class or second class citizens of any nation. Until the color of the man's skin is of no significance than the color of his eyes. I've got to say one. And until that day, the dream of lasting peace, world citizenship, and the rule of...
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at tellusenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.
From here to beyond the South. From here to the Caribbean or further north. Where can I see news connecting the whole South? From Washington. From Mexico. From Caracas.